Here's something strange about the plant you've pulled out of your garden 100 times. For 1 hour a day, sometimes less, it does something almost nobody has ever actually watched happen. It blooms, but not like a rose. Not like a sunflower showing off for the whole neighborhood. Purslane blooms quietly, briefly, in a window so narrow, so specific, that most gardeners who have grown this plant for years have never once seen it happen, because by the time the flower opens, they've already yanked the plant out and tossed it on the compost pile. But here's the part that changes everything. That bloom isn't random. It's not decoration. It is the plant making a calculated decision, reading sunlight, reading temperature, reading the exact mood of your garden, and choosing, deliberately, the single best moment to reveal itself. And once you understand what triggers that moment, you'll never look at this weed the same way again. So today, we're going to slow down. We're going to look closer than anyone ever bothers to. And we're going to answer the question, hiding in plain sight in your own backyard, why does purslane actually bloom? Let's start with what this flower actually looks like, because most people who've lived alongside purslane their entire lives have never looked closely enough to know. The flower is small, genuinely small, roughly 5 to 8 millimeters across, about the size of a pencil eraser. 5 petals, arranged in a perfect little star, colored a bright, almost electric yellow. In the center sits a small cluster of orange-yellow stamens, dusted with pollen. And here's the thing, it's beautiful. Not pretty for a weed. Actually beautiful. If this same flower showed up on a plant you'd paid $12 for at a nursery and placed carefully in a garden border, you'd stop and admire it. You'd probably take a photo. But on purslane, almost nobody ever sees it. Not because it isn't there. Because of when it chooses to appear, purslane flowers open only in direct sunlight. Not bright shade. Not an overcast morning. Not the soft light of early dawn. Direct sunfall. Unfiltered. Hitting the plant directly. In most gardens, that means a window of roughly mid-morning to early afternoon. On a clear day, and by mid-afternoon, regardless of how much daylight is left, the flowers close again. Sealed shut. Invisible. Botanists have names for this behavior. Nyctinicity, when it relates to day and night rhythms. Heliotropic sensitivity, when it's tied specifically to direct light. But here's what those words are actually describing. This plant is not being lazy, or careless, or random about when it shows itself. It's being precise. Because think about who's out there during that exact window mid-morning. Warm but not yet scorching. Small native bees, hoverflies. The very insects that pollinate purslane are most active in exactly that stretch of the day. Too early, and it's too cold for them to be moving. Too late in the afternoon, and the heat has pushed them into hiding. So purslane doesn't just open its flowers, it opens them at the single most strategically valuable moment of the entire day, synchronized almost to the hour. With the exact window when its pollinators are working hardest. That's not an accident. That's not a coincidence of biology. That is a level of timing precision that most flowering plants in your garden don't even attempt. And this is where it gets interesting, because that timing is only half the story. The flower opening on schedule is one thing, but something has to trigger the plant's decision to bloom in the first place. Purslane doesn't flower the moment it sprouts. It grows first, sometimes for weeks, quietly building tissue, building roots, before it ever produces a single bud. Something specific has to shift in its environment before that switch flips. And what that trigger actually is, what purslane is reading and reacting to before it decides the moment has come, reveals something about this plant that completely reframes the story of why it keeps coming back. No matter how many times you've pulled it out, that's next. So what actually flips the switch? What tells purslane, after weeks of quiet growth, that now is the moment to bloom? The answer is a combination of two things: day length and temperature. Together, they signal something very specific to the plant, not the beginning of good growing conditions. But the peak of them, the absolute best moment, Purslane flowers when the days are long, the temperatures are warm, and the environment is about as supportive of new life as it's ever going to get. And that's actually the opposite strategy of a lot of plants in your garden. Many species flower in response to stress, a kind of biological insurance policy, rushing to produce seed before conditions get worse. Purslane does something almost the reverse. It reads maximum favorable conditions and responds by going all in. Think about the logic here for a second. Because it's genuinely elegant. Seeds produced at the peak of summerland in warm soil, under long days, with plenty of rain. They get the longest possible runway to establish themselves before autumn arrives. The parent plant isn't just reproducing, it's timing that reproduction to give its offspring the single best possible start in life. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. That's only half of Purslane's strategy. Because Purslane also flowers under stress, drought, crowded roots, disturbed soil. Any of these can trigger a second, completely different flowering response, one that isn't calm or optimistic at all. This is the plant making what's essentially an emergency calculation conditions are turning bad. And there may not be much time left. Reproduce now before the window closes for good. So Purslane isn't running one strategy, it's running two simultaneously, depending on what the moment calls for. One optimistic, one built entirely for survival. And that's actually the reason this plant is so remarkably difficult to get rid of. If you see Purslane blooming abundantly in the middle of summer, thick and healthy, that's the plant reading your garden as thriving. Peak conditions, full commitment to reproduction. But if you see a small, stressed-looking Purslane plant throwing out a flower early in spring or late into autumn on a plant that barely looks established, that's the emergency pathway. That's the plant racing the clock. Either way, the result is the same seeds, thousands of them, quietly banking themselves into your soil, waiting for the right moment to sprout again next year. And the year after that, and the year after that, which is exactly why pulling this plant never seems to work for long. You're not just fighting one plant with one strategy. You're up against an organism that has built two separate paths to the same outcome, and it will take whichever one the moment gives it. But here's where the story gets even more interesting. Because for centuries, long before anyone understood the botany behind any of this, different cultures across the world were watching this exact blooming behavior and reading meaning into it that, it turns out, lines up almost perfectly with the science. That's next. Now here's something remarkable. Long before anyone had a microscope, or understood nyctinasty, or could explain pollinator activity windows, people across completely different parts of the world were watching this exact same bloom, and they were drawing conclusions about it. Conclusions that, centuries later, modern science would go on to confirm almost perfectly. Let's start in Persia, home to one of the longest, most sophisticated traditions of medicinal plant knowledge on Earth. In Persian traditional medicine, Purslane wasn't dismissed as a weed. It was understood as a plant of cooling and balance, something used deliberately, carefully, for its healing properties. And here's the specific detail that matters. Persian physicians didn't harvest Purslane whenever it happened to be convenient. They harvested it specifically around flowering time. Why? Because the bloom was understood as a signal, the plant's own announcement that it had reached full potency. The moment of maximum expression of everything the plant had to offer. And modern phytochemical analysis has since confirmed they were right. The concentration of the compounds that make Purslane valuable medicinally and nutritionally actually does peak when the plant is in active flower. Physicians working thousands of years ago, with no laboratory equipment at all, had already figured this out simply by watching and paying attention and passing that knowledge down. Now let's travel to the American South, to communities that carried forward older European and African herbal traditions, blending them into something distinctly their own. Here, a flowering Purslane plant wasn't just noticed. It was read as a sign of abundance, Not abundance is a poetic metaphor literal. Agricultural abundance. A garden where purslane bloomed freely was understood to be a garden where the soil was alive, where the conditions were right, where something deep in the growing environment was working the way it should. Experienced gardeners in these traditions actually used purslane as a diagnostic tool. If the purslane was blooming well, they knew the garden was healthy. If it wasn't flowering, if it looked stressed, thin, straggly, that told them something in the soil, or the water, or the light needed attention. Think about how sophisticated that actually is. These gardeners had turned a plant most people consider a nuisance into a living sensor. A plant that reads soil temperature, moisture, and light quality all at once, and reports its findings through nothing more than whether or not it chooses to bloom. They weren't guessing. They were listening to the plant. And the plant was telling them the truth. And finally, Greece, where purslane has been part of both the kitchen and the medicine cabinet for thousands of continuous years. Here, the relationship with the blooming plant looked a little different. Rather than treating the flower as an endpoint the moment the plant stopped being useful, Greek tradition treated it as simply one phase in a much longer relationship. You harvested the young, tender plants through late spring and early summer for eating. Then, deliberately, you allowed some plants to go on to flower in midsummer, which brought pollinators into the garden, benefiting everything else growing nearby. And once those plants had flowered and set seed, you collected the seed for next year's planting. The bloom wasn't the end of the story. It was simply a different chapter of it, one with its own value, its own purpose, inside a much longer cycle. And this is really the thread that ties all three traditions together. Persia read the bloom as peak potency. The American South read it as a signal of environmental health. Greece read it as one stage in an ongoing relationship with the plant across its entire life. Three completely different cultures, on three different continents, arriving independently at variations of the same underlying truth: the bloom means something. It's not decoration. It's not an accident. It's information. And that's exactly the kind of understanding that disappears the moment a plant gets reclassified as simply a weed. Because once your only relationship with a plant is trying to eliminate it, you stop watching closely enough to notice what it's actually telling you. And you lose access to everything that observation would have given you. So if the ancestors were reading the bloom correctly all along, the next question is obvious. What does it actually mean for you right now? In your own garden, if you know when to look. That's next. So here's the practical part. The part that actually changes how you treat this plant the next time you walk out into your garden. The nutritional research on purslane is remarkably consistent on one point: its concentrations of omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin C, vitamin A, beta-carotene, and the antioxidant compounds that make this plant so nutritionally exceptional. They're all highest in the young, tender growth. The soft stems and leaves that appear before the plant has committed any real energy to flowering. Once blooming begins, the plant shifts its priorities. It starts redirecting resources, real, measurable resources, away from leaf tissue and toward flowers, and eventually seeds. And as that shift happens, the nutritional density of the leaves gradually declines from its earlier peak. Now, here's where most people get the wrong idea. It's easy to hear that and assume the bloom means the plant is past its prime. Done. No longer worth harvesting. That's not quite right. The bloom isn't a sign that purslane is finished being useful. It's a signal, a very specific, very useful signal that your best window for harvesting leaves has peaked and is beginning to close, which means if you want another flush of tender, nutrient-dense growth, there's a simple move. Cut the plant back. Trim it. That single action redirects the plant's energy away from flowering and back into vegetative growth, giving you an entirely new harvest window before the season finally ends. This isn't some advanced technique. It's something practiced almost instinctively in every food culture that's maintained a real relationship with purslane over generations. Watch for the first flowers. Cut back when you see them. Let the plant regrow. Repeat. Now what about the flowers themselves? Are they worth anything? Or are they just the plant's way of saying harvest window closed? They're actually edible and genuinely pleasant. Mild, slightly sweet, with none of the tangy acidity you get from the leaves. Scatter a few over a salad, and you get a small burst of visual brightness, along with a delicate flavor note. You can eat them straight off the plant, standing right there in the garden. They're not nutritionally significant the way the leaves are, but there's absolutely no reason not to enjoy them. And then there's the part of this plant that almost nobody ever talks about. The seeds. Purslane seeds are tiny, dark, and produced in numbers that are almost hard to comprehend. A single flowering purslane plant can produce somewhere between 40,000 and 200,000 seeds. Let that number sit for a second. 200,000. From one plant, in one season, across the Middle East and North Africa, ground purslane seed has been used for centuries as a flour supplement worked into flatbreads and porridges as an added source of nutrition. The seeds are high in protein, and they carry their own concentration of the same beneficial fatty acids found in the leaves. Traditional cultures that understood this didn't waste the flowering plant. They harvested the seed deliberately, threshing the flowered stems over cloth to collect those tiny dark grains, then storing them to use through the winter months. It's slower work. It takes patience, and a kind of fine, careful attention that modern life doesn't really encourage anymore. But it's worth knowing the option even exists, and worth knowing that a purslane plant in full bloom and seed isn't a failed harvest. It's a different harvest entirely. So the next time you see purslane starting to flower in your garden, here's the shift in thinking worth making. That bloom isn't the end of the plant's usefulness. It's a checkpoint, a signal telling you exactly what to do next. Cut back for more leaves, or let it go for flowers and seed. Either way, the plant keeps giving you something. You just have to know how to read the signal, and once you understand all of that, the precision of the bloom, the dual strategy behind it, the wisdom older cultures built around it, and the practical value hiding inside it, there's really only one thing left to say about this plant you've spent years trying to get rid of. That's next. So here's where all of this leaves us. Every gardener who has ever dealt with purslane has had the same relationship with it, one built entirely on opposition. You pull it, it comes back. You dig it out, it re-roots. You spray it, it returns anyway. It can feel, honestly, like an enemy that simply refuses to be defeated. But everything we just walked through breaks that frame completely. Because the bloom was never a hostile act. It was never the plant defying you. It was the plant doing exactly what living things do when conditions are finally perfectly right, expressing its own excellence at being precisely what it is. Small yellow flowers, opening only in direct sunlight, timed, almost to the hour, with the pollinators that need them, reading soil, light, and temperature with a precision no gadget in your garage could replicate, then closing again by afternoon as if the entire performance was never meant to be witnessed at all. So here's what I want you to do. The next time you walk outside on a clear morning, before you reach down to pull anything, look first. Check if it's blooming. Watch it for 2 full minutes. Because what you'll be looking at isn't a weed. It's a plant operating at the exact peak of what it evolved to do in your garden. In this moment, for you, whether you ever noticed or not, that's not nothing. That is, in fact, quite something. And if this changed the way you'll look at your own garden, hit subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of story we dig up every single week. Drop a comment and tell me, will you actually stop and look next time and share this with the one gardener you know who's declared war on this plant? They deserve to know the truth too.